May 27th, 1811. Dear Mr. Thompson, it has been some time, old friend. I hope it is not rude to ask a rather large favor of you. In the time our families have been friends, the way we have come to rely on you has been invaluable. As I have gone about my travels, as we Smiths are wont to do, I have taken on a ward. She is a bright young woman, not much younger than your Francesca. Ash has been a great traveling companion, but I'm afraid I cannot take her with me on the next leg of my journey. My nephew began his grand tour not a month ago, and has already landed himself in a spot of trouble. I have the great misfortune of being the only relative with the fastest means of getting him back on his way to France, and my brother has requested I remain with him for the rest of the trip. It will not be an appropriate environment for a young lady, so I do ask you take her, and this gift for the remainder of my time abroad. I shall return a year from her arrival to collect my ward, and to show my thanks again. Sincerely, Dr. John Smith.
June 7th, 1811. What the hell was I thinking when I let you talk me into this? The TARDIS is a never-ending pocket of dimensions, and you think hanging out in the Regency area is more fun? It took a day before I started to understand the yellow wallpaper. Seriously, it's so slow. I don't know half the etiquette, and I'm running out of excuses before I just look rude. The only person that's giving me any grace is their second daughter, Francesca. She's like a year older and hasn't left me alone since he dropped me off. It's hard to tell if she's actually being nice, or if she's being that mean girl nice. If anything could transcend time, it's mean girl nice. I'm overthinking it, aren't I? Anyways, you also suck for sending me at the end of the season. Mrs. Thompson has taken to finding me a husband like poor Francesca. If you ever get the idea again that I, or any other butch lesbian, might like a long vacation in any time period with strict gender roles, I'd like you to give that a second thought. I have to wear a goddamn plank of wood in my stays. Yeah, exploring history is fun, but I think I take a Cyberman over pretending to be some shrieking violet to preserve people's feelings. At least Francesca understands the rules of it all. She hasn't been nearly as excited as some of her friends we've been hanging out with. Yesterday, I saw her mother try to set her up with the same guy she's been stuck with all week. Within a minute, she had that guy thinking it was his idea to ask her friends to walk around the gardens instead. How's the TARDIS doing? It sounded pretty rough when you left. I hope the detective didn't drive her into an early grave. You said you've popped between universes before, but we barely made it out of there. Speaking of which, another thing. It's a time machine. You could have picked me up yesterday, or, once again, I could have just stayed on Baker Street with you. I can explore Regency-era England just as fine from there, or even better with a guide who I'm actually friends with. You think I'm gonna embarrass you in front of your cool history friends, don't you? Dick. Sincerely, Ash Lee.
June 22nd, 1822. Dear Ashley, it's going to be fine. You're right that you didn't have to stay, and no, I did not write the date wrong again. Unfortunately, I arrived at Baker Street a little later than I meant to, and you know how the timeline can be. When I made it at last, there was a stack of letters waiting. Until you write them all, you need to stay right where you are. We've dealt with enough paradoxes to know what could happen. Give yourself some time, and you'll adjust to the slow life. As for Francesca, she is a lovely young woman. I think you are more than overthinking it, Ash. The TARDIS is stuck where she is for now. I was able to pull together some things to get my letters through the time stream, but it may take me longer than I previously thought to get her running again. Unfortunately, it may have been the detective's antics that did her in. That, on top of hopping between pocket dimensions to escape, burned out a few key pieces. If I were able to get back to Unit or Gallifrey, it might not take as long to craft replacement parts. But my fastest way there is grounded for the time being. I might have to put out a beacon for another doctor. On the brighter side, you're getting the ultimate Austen experience. They're about to publish Sense and Sensibility. You'll get to see the rise of the literary star like never before. Just wait until the season ends and you return to the Thompson estate in the country. It's a lovely place with plenty to do besides beat young men off with a stick. I do apologize for not taking that into account. It sounds like Francesca could help you with that situation, though. Sticking close together can help. If you present a united front against Mrs. Thompson, you will make it to the summer just fine. By the way, there's a creek about 8 kilometers west of the Thompson estate. Half the walk is through the woods, but it's worth the trek with someone who knows their way around. All around the area are the most marvelous rocks you've ever seen. If you ground them, they'd make some of the most marvelous pigments you've ever seen. In a previous life, I and Mr. Thompson's father, Edmund, found the area while exploring for his paint-making. Sincerely, the Doctor.
July 18th, 1811. Dear Doctor, there's no way Miss Thompson's gonna let me out of her sights long enough for me to find the creek. But thanks. I took your advice, stuck it out until we started for the countryside, and stuck to Francesca's side to learn how she did it all. Now, Mrs. Thompson is more convinced that I need to be taught how to be a proper young lady. Apparently, my modern American ways aren't appropriate if I'm going to be the ward of a proper gentleman. If you do set out that beacon, I am begging you to send you to pick me up first. Eventually, I will snap, and Mrs. Thompson's blood will probably end up on my hands if she's serious about taking on my education herself. I will write those letters from the TARDIS to keep the timeline together. I do not care. I'd rather fall into a paradox than read any more etiquette books. I would rather escape a Sisyphus trap. No, I would rather be kidnapped by the detective and deal with her cyclical, Time Lord bullcrap again. It would be genuinely easier facing the Autons than picking up the wrong fork again. Like, you couldn't have found me a normal family to board with? I'm not even middle class, dude. I don't know how rich people work. If you do not come and pick me up and let me ride in the TARDIS, I will become the real-life Lady Whistledown. I read those books front to back. You know I could do it. Sincerely, Ash Lee.
August 1st, 1822. Dear Ash, I have complete faith in your ability to control your impulses and not murder Mrs. Thompson over tea. She can be a handful, but it's mostly out of love. Motherhood gave a new outlet for her personal neuroses, and medicine won't catch up with her needs for quite a while longer. If you ever need an escape, Mr. Thompson took up his father's legacy for paint. Unlike him, he prefers oils. The fumes can get to be a bit much, but his studio is always open to eager students and closed to those who would disturb their peace. Besides, while you're a capable young adult, you are no Penelope Featherington. There's a bubble under London. I don't know where it came from or why it's there, but I ran into myself there. We had a nice chat, and I was able to borrow some spare parts I'm going to pick up along the way. That was after the bubble. We did the usual, snooping around, taking readings, interviewing witnesses. For a while we were able to play detective until some actual detectives came round. I must say I was rather disagreeable as to which of us would be the lead. Am I usually so disagreeable? Stubborn, on the occasion, but not so bull-headed I wouldn't be allowed to patron a china shop. That just goes to show personal development. How was the end of summer? I can imagine between Mrs. Thompson's lessons you and Francesca have been getting about. The last time I visited with the Thompsons, we spent a holiday in Bath. You would meet people there who could hold a conversation from breakfast to supper. It was an art in and of itself. I remember there was a man who was able to weave through topics with such flawlessness, he left his conversation partners speechless. Of course, it made them rather one-sided, but he could perfectly flow from one subject to the next and return to another when the time suited it, without forgetting a single detail. I do hope you'll have the chance to see what else they have to offer you in Bath before I pick you up. We could pop over after. That would be just lovely. Sincerely, the Doctor.
August 22nd, 1811. Of the yous I've met, you're one of the more level-headed, I guess? I'm still trying to wrap my head around how you never look the same, so I'm not the person to ask. We didn't go to the bath, but Fanny somehow convinced her mom to let her take over my etiquette lessons. She's a lot easier to please with this. She seems to get that it's more than just not knowing the rules. When the formal stuff gets overwhelming, we usually quit for the morning or a day and blow off some steam. Fanny started to teach me how to paint, like her grandpa. She does watercolor. If the other you is still there, could you grab me for a minute? There and back. I won't open a paradox. I just like a couple of hours where I can wear sweatpants and talk normally. I also forgot some stuff in my room on the TARDIS. It's not a big deal. I just need a few things if I'm going to be here until next spring. I promise this isn't some kind of plan to get out of staying. Sincerely, Ash Lee.
September the 10th, 1822. Dear Ash, I do apologize I didn't open this letter before I left. If another me stops by Baker Street, I could send whatever it is along, but I honestly don't trust your willingness to return and finish the year. By now you're probably climbing the walls for an MP3 player, or however you listen to music in 2018. Anyways, the bubble. I went to investigate more, and it had disappeared. I apparently thought it would be a good idea to see what the bubble was protecting. Of course, I told myself to wait a moment because I wanted to grab something from the TARDIS first. There were untold discoveries to be made. But I went ahead anyways, and the bubble popped back up. Now I'm stuck in there while I'm outside and neither of us can hear each other. And then, you will never believe it, there were mice people. Giant mice. Like overgrown pets that got out of their cages. They took me into custody until they could verify that I wasn't a threat. It turns out there was actually an alien ship that crashed under what would eventually become London. Everyone died, and hundreds of years later, after feasting on the remains, these mice have grown sentient and bipedal. They've built a whole society and were trying to move out their little rodent utopia. Of course, we couldn't have that kind of structural work under the city right now. So we got the other Mies TARDIS together and organized a mass exodus to a livable planet they could rebuild on. They were actually rather agreeable when we explained the problem with building outward. I probably am still down there making sure the remaining bubble won't collapse. In its current state, if it does, it won't cause a citywide collapse, although there might be a frozen yogurt shop over there when you're in high school that will collapse. But you remember what that was like. Losing one wouldn't change too much. The TARDIS is coming along well too. She can now move through space, but not time. There's also not much about the place I can control. Right now, I'm commuting to Hyde Park, about 20 minutes away. Hopefully, when I get the new temporal combustors installed, I'll be able to get lost in time, too. Don't worry. I'll remember to bring your letters before that. I'm actually quite excited to see how your story goes over the winter. Trying to pace out all your letters while working on this has been rather hard. I'm curious what the holidays hold. Sincerely, the Doctor.
September 30th, 1811. Dear Doctor, sorry it took so long to get back to you. Forgot about the thing. It can wait. If I didn't have enough to complain about, the medical system, or lack, therefore is on my list twice now. I started coming down with some ancient disease. I'm not immune to the last month, and I'm still pretty shaky. It wasn't pretty, but I'll spare you the gory details. You know what I forgot about history? Everyone is doing drugs. Mrs. Thompson sent for the doctor, and when I didn't bounce back from the plague or whatever, and he tried to prescribe me opium. Mrs. Thompson ended up taking some for herself after suggesting cocaine might be better for my condition. Like, dude, this is not what Keira Knightley prepared me for. Welcome to the Regency era. Have people help dress you, chocolate for breakfast, and cocaine for your cold. That's a pretty big escalation from the warm wine they keep giving me. They say it's good for a cold. I say day drinking is usually tacky. But I made an exception, considering how miserable I feel. Honestly, I'm just beating around the bush. I think Fanny's getting married. At the start of getting sick, when Mrs. Thompson made me stay in bed, nothing about the day really changed. Despite her mom's feelings on it, Fanny took her meals with me. She would pull up a chair up to the bed and eat off the tray while I sat up. Like you brought up before, Senses and Sensibility, was published, and she finally got a copy. We've been reading it together and taking turns aloud when I felt better. I like how Fanny reads it. She's not a bad performer. If she had a century and some change, she probably could have given Kate Winslet a run for Mary Ann. We also worked on our paintings, but that's besides the point. The actual point is we were spending every day together, and then all of a sudden, it just stopped. She still came by and had some meals with me, but Mrs. Thompson had her meeting with her friend's son. Since I've gotten better, I've gotten to see what the deal is. His name is Bernard Dowding. Bernard Dowding. That sounds ridiculous. Worse off, I think that Mrs. Thompson is really pushing him because Fanny hasn't pawned him off to someone else once. Then again, she barely has the time to interject. He goes on and on with these boring tangents about the job that his dad got him. I don't know what about his family being rich really says about his ability to be a good clergyman. It doesn't sound like this guy has really paid attention to a single thing that he's read. Either way, he's absolutely proposing soon. Mrs. Thompson has been planning a party before it gets too cold, and I think they're planning everything for then. I don't even know how she can go along with this. Francesca Dowding. Doesn't even sound like a name. She's Francesca Thompson. She doesn't care about getting married. She cares about her siblings, her nieces. She cares about politics and what they're talking about in the houses. She cares about her paintings. Did you know that Fanny made her own paints? Her father taught her as a child, like his father taught him. Her older sister didn't care to, but she did. Fanny's always cared about her family's craft and had a natural ability. That doesn't discount how much work she puts into it, though. If she is painting for whatever reason, she likes to go through her grandfather's collection and study. There's something wrong. I don't know why Fanny isn't brushing off this guy like the others. I don't know what to do.
November 16th, 1822. Ashley, please do not do anything rash. Please. I mean it. If Bernard proposes and Francesca says yes, then that's her decision to make. It's very likely their mothers planned this a long time ago. Sincerely, the Doctor. November 16th, 1822. Dear Ashley, I just found a letter from Mr. Thompson in your stack after sending that note off. Did you really need to punch Bernard at the party? You are very lucky Francesca backed up your claim of self-defense. Was it actually? If it was, I'm proud of you, but I am worried after how angry you sounded in that letter. Reading it again, I want to ask you something. How do you really feel about Francesca? The longer you stay, the more fond you sound when talking about her. Fonder than I think even you realize. Are you mad that she didn't rebuff Bernard because you don't think she's doing what's right for herself? Or because you are falling in love with her? Sincerely, the Doctor.
November 30th, 1811. Dear Doctor, as I said to Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Dowding, Bernard is a cad and should not be left around women unattended. This is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Sincerely, Ash Lee.
December 15th, 1822. Dear Ashley, that doesn't answer the question. Sincerely, the Doctor.
December 28th, 1811. Dear Doctor, I plead the fifth. Sincerely, Ash Lee.
January the 11th, 1817. Dear Ashley, in that case, the TARDIS is coming along very nicely. We're finally out of Hyde Park and back in Baker Street. She's sitting rather pretty in the attic as I write this letter. Not only did the temporal combustors get her moving through time, but it kicked the stem bolt array back online. I cannot put in words what a relief that was. Trying to get your hands on self-sealing stem bolts on this side of the universe is unheard of. Of course, they aren't original to the TARDIS, but they do just as well as electroceramic welders. Come to think of that, I don't think you can even find electroceramic welders anymore. The last time I had to do work on the stem bolt array, it was the electroceramic welder array. My granddaughter Susan and I had just arrived on Earth and the TARDIS was grounded in a dump. Well, we did have a house while we stayed in one place for a while, but we still spent a good deal of time living out of the old girl. It was Susan's idea to try replacing a blown welder with stem bolts. About a month after she floated the idea, we ran into another traveller passing by Earth. Some bartering later, and we had a functional TARDIS again. She ran just as smoothly as before, with only a few hiccups that I'm not entirely sure are mechanical or interpersonal. How are you holding up? Sincerely, the Doctor.
January 24th, 1811. Dear Doctor, I have no idea what most of that means, but I'm glad that the TARDIS is getting better. I also didn't know that you had a granddaughter. Where is she now? If you're telling me she's still living in the TARDIS, I think it's time we have a talk about how many secrets you keep, because I would have liked to know if we had a third passenger bumping about with us. If it's too much, feel free to disregard. It's been fine over here. I have a few portraits attached. Fanny painted one of me when I was doing my practice sketches. The other was my first attempt at replicating a portrait in their home. I think you'll find this guy a little familiar. Fanny said something about there being a whole family of Smiths. So I'm just gonna assume that you're Johnny and Johann too. Sincerely, Ash Lee.
February 10th, 1817. Dear Ashley, that was many lifetimes ago. Susan left when she grew up, like most children do. As far as I'm aware, she's probably living rather comfortably with her husband. At least I do hope so. These portraits are impressive, Ash. Fanny is a gifted artist. She captured that annoyed look you get when you're focusing and someone looks at you. Your portrait is an impressive replication as well, considering you are translating an oil painting to watercolor. That was me a couple of lifetimes ago. When you're popping about and take a shine to people, you come up with ways to justify visiting again. That is why I couldn't accompany you back there in May. The last time I saw them in this life, Francesca was perhaps 10. For myself, it was maybe a few months before meeting you. If they saw me now, they would know something was up. Sincerely, the Doctor.
March 24th, 1811. Dear Doctor, the snow is gone. I haven't seen it come down like this since I was little. For a couple of nights in a row, I convinced Francesca to sneak out and play with me. It was almost daylight, with how wide open the fields were. The moon wasn't even full, and the light bounced off every inch of white to make an uncanny wonderland. It was so quiet. Our footsteps sounded like trees falling. One of the servants caught us, but Fanny was able to bribe them into silence with one of her father's bottles of good brandy. She said that her father wouldn't care when he found out it was her, but I'm still a little worried about getting in trouble if he finds out it went to his servant. Doctor, you were right. We were finally able to get away from Mrs. Thompson to explore around the woods. I got a bag together and took the old path about 5 miles from the house. It was hard to find at first, but we followed your directions until we made it to the edge of the woods. Fanny found a marker carved into a tree and started freaking out. She was so excited. Apparently, it was a doodle she's seen in her grandfather's journals. We kept going until we found the creek. I think she might have burst into tears then and there if she hadn't been so excited. We spent the day washing and grinding stones to see which ones could be used to be pigments and which ones were a waste. We found a good deal of reds and greens with a few pale blue stones. My bag was filled to the top by the time we had to go back for tea. And she kissed me. I do love her. Over the winter, I couldn't stop thinking about your letter and being trapped together. I was so scared I wouldn't be able to keep it in anymore. But I guess she feels the same. Her parents left her some time to collect her younger brothers from her relatives, leaving us a week without having to be proper ladies, with her mom breathing down our necks. The servants didn't seem to question when Fanny and I locked ourselves in her father's studio to work on our paints. That's where everything came out. There's something about her eyes when she's focused on a subject. Something that made me feel like I was somehow the biggest thing in the world and the most fragile. Like if she looked at me any harder, I would shatter. I couldn't keep it in anymore. I told her about us. about the TARDIS, about 2018, and how every day with her, it kept getting harder to keep all these secrets and pretend like I'm not madly in love with her. She thought I'd gone mad from the isolation or the fumes from her father's oil paints. But eventually, she came around. When I showed her the books you let me borrow, Fanny finally believed me. We spent that week closer than we had all year. Doctor, I'm scared to leave her behind. I think that's why I was so scared to get close when I arrived. It would have been easier if Fanny was just a mean girl who was fake nice. It would have made it so much easier when you take me away this May. There's no way I can stay. I'd die if I had to stay back here. But I think I'd die if I had to leave her behind. I don't know what to do. And it's tearing me apart. Sincerely, Ash Lee.
Dear Ashley, the most I can say is to enjoy what time you have and see what the future has to bring. Sincerely, the Doctor. Ashley took the Doctor's advice. In the time between his last letter and the end of May, she and Francesca didn't spend a moment apart. When the time came, they managed to convince Mrs. Thompson it would be best if she accompany Ash to Baker Street to reunite with the Doctor. The whole carriage ride, their fingers were interlocked in an iron grip. There was only so much pretending they could do that the end wasn't rushing towards them. When they arrived at the house, it pained the pair to pull apart from each other and step into the public street. The Doctor answered after the first knock. There was some relief when Ashley finally saw her friend. After a long year, the details of their memory had dulled. He wasn't that much taller than them, eyes still holding that ephemeral sparkle that they had seen in every other one of his forms. The Doctor opened his arms, and Ashley threw herself into his warm hug. Emotion had already overwhelmed them into silence, trapping their words beyond where she could reach. A moment later, the Doctor released them and looked to Francesca. The young woman was staring with plain surprise at the familiar face. "It's lovely to see you again, Francesca. You look well," he said. You can't be. Ash had said, Dr. Smith? Just Doctor. The trio headed inside, out of the prying eyes of the public. The TARDIS was waiting right there for them in the foyer. Ashley placed a hand on its side and sighed. That familiar feeling of something too smooth to be wood was grounding under their fingers. She could almost feel the unsteady whir of energy just under the blue paint. It moved in tandem with the uneasy feeling building within, calming and soothing the companion. "So, all of the Smith family, you are all of them? Jonathan? Johann?" Francesca asked. "Yes," the Doctor said on a chuckle. "Your grandfather was a good friend, and your father after him as well." "Fascinating." Looking to Ashley, Francesca took a steady breath. "So, now we must say goodbye? You are going back to 2018? She asked. "Not quite. When Ash is ready, we'll return, but until then we explore. We only had to stay in place for a while I did some repairs, but now..." Francesca stepped past the Doctor to Ashley's side. She took their hand in hers and brought it to her lips. "Is there no way I can convince you to stay?" she whispered against their knuckles. For a moment, Ashley closed their eyes, enjoying the feeling of her girlfriend's fingers against her skin. They tried to catalogue every detail, the feeling of Francesca's fingertips against their pulse point, her sweet breath tickling their skin, the gentle brush of her lips as she spoke. Ashley tried to retain every detail like it was the only thing that could keep her going. "Is there no way I can convince you to come?" they asked. It was hard to tell if the sound Francesca made was a gasp or a laugh. The next thing Ash knew, Her lips were against hers. Tears burned as they filled their eyes and spilled down either's cheeks. Trying to pull apart from each other took all the will either of them had, foreheads pressing together. "I love you," Ashley whispered. Francesca definitely laughed that time. She brushed a tear from their cheek with a thumb before placing soft kisses at different points across their face. It was gentle and thorough, from cheek to cheek, like that first day they met, and she greeted Ashley in the way her French aunt had taught her. On her forehead, as soft as when they first fell ill and could barely stay conscious without pain. The tip of her nose, playful and teasing like before they could broach their feelings. She pressed a final kiss to Ashley's trembling lips. For a long moment, they prayed to whoever would listen that they hadn't finished that last letter. "I love you too," Francesca said. The TARDIS wasn't quite the same gothic place it was when Ashley first arrived. The doctor had freshened things up as he went about repairs. She couldn't focus so much on the details as her girlfriend followed them in. In her eyes, Ash could see the world break apart and come back together with better understanding. Their stories began to make sense. Things suddenly seemed less impossible. It didn't make goodbye any easier. "Please promise me you'll return," Francesca said as she stood at the door. "I don't know if I can, but I promise I'll do everything in my power to," Ashley said. "Perhaps this doesn't need to be goodbye entirely," the doctor interjected. "After all, there's no reason why you can't send letters for Ashley here at Baker Street." "Really?" Francesca asked. "We can pick up the first batch as soon as we leave." "Please." Francesca stole a final kiss when she was finally able to pull herself from her lover's embrace. It almost felt like cutting off a piece of themselves when Ashley watched her step out of the police box. Her hand trembled as it held the door, taking another shaky breath. "Next time," they said. "I will hold you to that," Francesca said, smiling despite the way the tears ran down her face. The door finally closed. The TARDIS roared to life. Everything seemed to suck out of the room as Ashley felt their knees shake. Next time.
May 27th, 1817. Dearest Mother, whether I wrote this letter or not, I know my disappearance has been distressing, but it would be rude to leave without a word. I know this is very confusing, but in the end, this is your wish. Do not worry. There was no other option in the end. Neither of us could have been happy apart or staying here. So, we both know this is what you have always wanted. I am finally giving up my stubbornness and accepted a marriage proposal. But I don't believe you or Father would approve of my betrothed. That is why I had to leave. I love you, and Father, and Catherine, and her children, and even Roger, despite how he has always bothered me as a brother. But I love Ash too. I love them with all my heart, even if I cannot love the way you would approve. Others like me may be content to live in arrangements with their husbands who look the other way, but I have a chance to find a time where I can call this wonderful person my wife. I know you will pretend this never happened. I know you will tell people I became ill and was sent to recover before succumbing or marrying a distant lord or some other imaginative tale. You have always been good at explaining the unflattering to your peers. Say what you must, but know that I am happy. I am loved. Sincerely, Fanny.